Several years ago, during the plague years, I filmed a video about the state of racing. It was a little bit of the sky is falling, and I got a little bit of blowback on it. A lot of armchair quarterback stuff, a lot of I'm not out there getting the racing on, I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm just crying wolf. Fair enough, certainly allowed to say those things, and you're all entitled to your own opinions. So I figured, it's been a couple of years, let's do a follow-up video, shall we? So it's 2023, end of the summer. This is Magic Mountain Family Fun Center. Or at least it used to be. See? Video games and most importantly, go-kart racing was a big thing here. We are in one of the richest, most affluent areas of Columbus, up here off of Polaris, which is right over yonder. And not that long ago, there was a company called Carvana that decided this didn't need to be a family fun center with go-karting and all that kind of stuff for the kiddos. It needed to be a car vending machine. So they bought it and they demolished it. I don't know if you've been paying any attention, but Carvana isn't doing real well now. And this is basically just, well, it's that. So, is this systemic? Is this a one-off? Is this just weird? Or is there truly something dire importance that we need to talk about in automotive? It's been a number of years. The economy's doing just fine, but are we seeing racing coming back? Are we seeing a golden time in racing? So, other than just hearing from me, I decided I might as well tap a couple of friends that I know that are really actually involved in this stuff, and we can hear it directly from them. Let's see, how are things actually going? First up, we're going to talk with Billy of Street Racing Channel. Many of you probably recognize that young man. He's grown up in racing his entire life. Very, very successful young man, and he lives it, he breathes it, he eats it day in and day out. So, we're going to talk to Billy, we're going to talk to a number of other people that are involved in all sorts of automotive racing, and we're going to see just what the state of racing really is in 2023. I hope you're interested. Stay tuned. For those of you who don't know, this is Billy of Street Racing Channel. Billy is very much deep in the world of drag racing. No prep racing, you name it, he drives it. I'm just a talking head. I'm not out there every weekend, week out, weekend, week out. Billy lives it and does it. So you really came up in the drag racing world. This has been your whole life.
Yeah, I don't know much else, honestly. It's pretty much all I think about. I go home at night, all I think about is racing. I work every day on race cars, you know, just trying to get ready for the weekend, for the next race. What's the next race?
It's
where do we got to go? What do we got to do to get better? What do we got to do to get faster?
What did we break last weekend?
Yeah. What do we got to fix?
Yeah.
It's constant.
So you came up with in like junior drag, right? So you came up like real small.
Yeah. I started out at 9 years old, racing junior dragsters, and it was a good experience. Teaching the basics of how to race, how to stage, how to do a burnout, you know, how the timing system works, stuff like that. It was good.
So, junior dragsters to then you did like bracket racing?
Yeah, I started out 16 years old racing this car. I did some bracket racing and Super Pro out at Pacemakers, our local track in Mount Vernon. Did fairly well in it, and my dad, he bought me my first truck when I was 15 and a half, so right before I started racing this, we kind of had a plan together to get that together and start racing it. And that was right about the time the Street Outlaws show came out, and that was a heavy influence on me through high school. You know, that show, and kind of watching 1320 video and stuff like that during class, and that's all I wanted to watch was just street racing and Street Outlaws. And so when we built the truck, that was kind of what we had geared it towards was street racing after, you know, a year or so watching all that stuff.
Sure.
And it just kind of went from there.
And that truck is kind of what morphed into what it is now, and what really kind of launched your whole
Street Racing Channel.
Yeah. So you started out with a truck that you and your dad started working on, and then off it went, and it's now what it is.
Yep.
So, you do a lot of like no prep stuff, not a lot of like big front end events like in Norwalk or the NHRA like that. Kind of
we're not doing NHRA or PDRA or any of that stuff. There are some cool classes that I'd like to get involved with like the PDRA. They're doing a new class. They're running a 28-10-5 slick. That's kind of interesting. But I think they call it Pro Street or Super Street. That's kind of cool, but as of right now, we don't really do a whole lot of front side of the track prep stuff or anything like that.
So, with coming up through Street Outlaws, and I don't think Street Outlaws, I think you really can't argue about how much impact that show had. It's like Fast and Furious when it first came out. Like it changed everything. That movie changed everything. That show changed everything because it really showed a lot of people, where that world was. A lot of people had no exposure to it whatsoever before that show came out.
You see, like people walking around PRI precision shirts everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything they see on that television show, they want because their favorite driver's wearing that. And it makes them feel like they're part of it. So it's cool. with where that show started, when it was like real legit shit street cars, that made high hundreds, low 1,000 horsepower, to the progression of where it's gone. I mean, things have changed drastically over the last 10 years or so. Where do you see the industry? I know in one of your recent videos you said like this is the golden era right now of no prep racing, of your type of racing, because anybody can really get into it. Like all of the stuff is available. What do you see as far as like the future of that process? Well, when Street Outlaws started, it was all small tire, and then they eventually started running more big tires. And then the big tire cars, where they were back half, pretty attainable, like old bracket car type deals, they ended up being, these damn near, pro stock or pro mods.
Right. Full tube chassis cars.
Yeah, full tube chassis. And a lot of these guys are running Pro Line, or they're running these really expensive engines, and they're running these Hemis and all billet stuff. Obviously that's not attainable for the normal person.
Yeah.
So I think they've tried to bring it back to somewhat of a level playing field with bringing small tire stuff back on the show. But even the small tire stuff, the cars that they're running on that are just big tire cars on small tires. With the engines set way back, and they're extremely lightweight, so they can put the weight where they need it to get the percentages right. I don't think it matters small tire or big tire anymore. You're spending a fortune to compete at the top level.
Yeah. So that actually brings up something I did really want to talk to you about, is the cost to get into a lot of this stuff is kind of prohibitive for a lot of people where it didn't used to be.
Yeah.
Like when you were first getting into this type of racing, I know your dad was working his ass off and shoveling every dollar he possibly could in to get in the racing program up and running. It's getting to the point where a lot of people who are trying to get into small tire are almost getting priced out of competition because they're going to show up and they're going to get knocked on by somebody with major money and major power in that car.
Don't get me wrong, there are people out there that have cars that some people would say would fit their budget, but they have a work ethic and they have more time devoted to it than a lot of other people can.
Sure. Based
on their jobs or certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Like, say if somebody has their own business, they may have a little bit more time to take off from work to devote to their racing program, whereas a lot of people working 9-to-5s can't.
Right.
That's a big thing too. So yeah, there are people out there that don't have $500,000 race cars that are doing well.
Right.
But a lot of them, either sacrifice sleep A lot of people still do have 9 to 5s. I know a lot of guys that have 9 to 5s, like Beaterbaum. I know he works on elevators for a living. Mm-hmm. And
then spends all evening and every weekend.
Yeah, so I just don't think he sleeps. Some people just want it more than others too. Very few, but there obviously are. There's all kinds. There's people that have tons of money and it just seems endless, and then there's people that just devote more time and they just want it badder.
Yeah. So you mentioned pacemakers. So when I did this video a couple of years ago, the first one, pacemakers was done.
Yeah.
It was closing down, but it's now been reopened under new management, right?
Yeah.
So that's back up and running. You guys do a lot of smaller tracks around the Midwestern area and then down into the South. What's the situation with? Are those tracks doing well? Are those tracks coming up? Are they seeing kind of a rise with the popularity of this type of thing? You still see some of those tracks closing?
I still see a lot of them closing, and a lot of bigger tracks lately.
Yeah.
It seems like closing.
That's something that's we're going to talk about a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think some of these outlaw tracks, if they've got the right mix of programs, they're doing well. But it's also getting to the point where it's a little oversaturated because so many people are trying to do the same events, and there's just not enough weekends in the year. And
especially when you're not like in Southern California,
yeah.
You only have a certain racing season.
Yeah, you only have 4 or 5 months out of the year to race, and there's only so many weekends to do stuff. There's a lot of oversaturation as well, and some of these tracks that don't have the right mixture of programs, they're going to suffer for sure if they only do one thing. Mm-hmm. If they only try to do heads-up racing, you're going to suffer. If they only try to do bracket racing, they're going to maybe suffer a little bit. You got to have a good mix of everything to stay alive, for sure.
So when I walked in, there was a video from Cletus that was playing up there. And one of the things that I got to go down to his track in February. And one of the things that I've always loved about Cletus was the fact that he is a put my money where my mouth is kind of guy. He made his money off of YouTube, and then he said, you know what, I want to support racing myself. I'm going to pour my money into making this a thing. Out in Lake of the Ozarks, they have a new racetrack that's out there. Very similar situation where a guy just poured a bunch of money into it to be able to build himself a racetrack, and like, hey, cool, I have myself a racetrack. So it kind of took like a patron to be able to make that as a race car thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you're going to see anybody that's really, because it's probably not a growing sport as much as we'd like to see it as that. It's the price of land, the price of insurance. It's a prohibitive type of thing that, unfortunately, like you said, we're seeing a lot of big tracks. I mean, like 2 years ago when we were getting ready to head down to Memphis for the first stop of Power Tour, the Memphis drag strips was sold, and it's now like bulldozed for
tracks with a lot of overhead or just seeing a good time to get out.
Yeah,
they're selling out, and some of these smaller tracks with less overhead, they can get by with it. It seems like, but yeah, a lot of these bigger tracks are definitely closing down. Starting to see that a lot.
So let's go on the positive side of things. We've all seen the closures. It's an unfortunate part of the industry that we're in. I don't know that there's a way that we can really fix it, unless you happen to become a bazillionaire and decide to build your own racetrack. I mean, it's almost what that becomes, where you have to have somebody who's willing to pour money into it at a loss to maintain that racing industry. But so say somebody wanted to first get started in this racing world that you do. Where would you say is the best bang for the buck? What should they get involved in to kind of bring in a new generation of racers?
Honestly, man, just going to your local track and doing test and tunes.
Okay.
Wednesday night, Thursday
like your
night.
street car?
Yeah, just take your street car out and do test and tunes and have fun, race your friends. That's the cheapest way to get into it. Yeah. Honestly. And I think a lot of tracks should do more than grudge nights like that, where you don't necessarily you're not racing a bunch of bracket guys all the time. You're more so just street cars, like Trails is doing their Friday night midnight drags. I'd love to see more tracks do stuff like that. I think that's a good way to get people involved, and that's probably the cheapest way. Just grudge racing. Grudge race your friends.
So stay away from immediately go out and build yourself a race car. Don't go directly into bracket racing. with a
No.
purpose-built race car, any of that stuff.
No, because what's going to happen, like, if you try to get into no prep racing by starting off bracket racing, you're just going to end up really not liking bracket racing. Because you're going to get your head cut off by the guys that have been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years every weekend at their local track.
Right.
It's not going to be very fun for you, I promise. And when I started out, I had a good coach.
Yeah.
You know, my dad had been doing it for years and stuff. So it was different for me where, you know, I didn't have a lot of investment in it initially. I didn't have to go out and buy a bracket car. I just hopped in my dad's car.
And he ran this for years.
He ran it for years and years and years. So I had a good start at it, you know. For somebody that's never been into racing before, I think the best way to get into it is just take your car out to the track and do a little grudge night or something. You know, a lot of these tracks, I think they need more grudge and, you know, heads-up oriented stuff like that.
I mean, it's a lot of your grudge race type stuff is really kind of the taking the street racing and just putting it on a controlled surface. So you're showing up in your car that you drove there on street, probably on street tires or some sort of tire that's almost a street tire.
Have somebody out there doing arm drops, or have somebody out there setting car links or something, you know. Yeah. Negotiate. Like, that's what...
Is that a thing you see happening?
No, I don't see that a lot. The grudge thing is kind of dead, and I don't... Like, in some areas it's probably doing well. Like, down south it's probably doing pretty well, but I really don't see it over here as much.
That makes sense. I mean, the idea is to get as many paid tickets to get in the gate and people butts in the seats and sell a bunch of hot dogs.
Yeah.
So whatever it is that people want, provide that. If that's the kind of racing they want, get it out there.
Grudge racing and street racing is honestly how I got into racing, as far as like the heads up stuff. Yeah. Like just finding somebody that wants to race, going out on a back road, and getting it done for a couple $100 or $100 or whatever. Yeah. If you could bring that environment to the street, I think a lot of people would go to stuff like that. And I see tracks doing stuff like that. Like I think Bradenton had a event last year. It was kind of like a grudge night. A lot of imports and stuff came out. Yeah. You know, they had like a bikini contest and getting that kind of crowd to the track. Sure. Like, and I think a lot of these tracks would probably benefit from having like takeover events at their track. Like if they want to do donuts
take it off the street, put it in the track. Or in the
if they want to do donuts in the middle of an intersection, why can't they just do it, you know, in a parking lot or something? Yeah. You know.
That's an interesting idea.
People, they like sliding the scat packs around, slide them around. We'll put barriers up. They can hit the barriers instead of people. Yeah. We could even put some mannequins out there, you know,
dress
if
them
they
up.
wanted to pretend.
Put a curb or two for the Mustang people.
No, for real though. Like
yeah.
And I mean, because they're honestly, the takeovers are messing up the car culture as far as the street stuff goes.
I think a lot of people that are outside of the world of the street racing side of things and all of them, they see the takeovers and they're like, oh, those damn street racers. Like, listen,
it's not
us.
It's not us.
You know, the people that are legitimately racing are very cognizant of who's around, who's going to get in danger. Like, that's never been a thing in the street racing community because if anything, we want nobody to be around. We want to be able to do what we do and get the heck out of there with nobody knowing and wiser. Yeah. Not doing it for the grams and then getting yourself thrown in prison for, you know, attempted manslaughter or something like that. For sure. So.
Yeah, there's like every major city in the United States, there's these takeovers now. Yeah. And it's just absolutely killed street
racing. We just saw the one a couple days ago from the one in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Where the guy was doing donuts in the middle of the intersection and then ran over a couple of people on the way out when the police showed up.
Yeah, it's for the drivers that actually do street race and try to do things in a somewhat, you know, normal environment, like safely. Yeah. It ruins it for them because it's not worth the risk because they don't want to get pulled over and, you know, there's a takeover, you know, a couple blocks down. Yep. They're going to associate you two together and then all of a sudden, you know, you're getting your car impounded or you're getting a, you know, street racing ticket, whereas before cops would be pretty cool about it.
And now that ticket can almost ruin your life.
Oh yeah, especially if you have a business or, you know, CDL that you were. I mean, it's part of. I understand it's part of the risk of it, but it seems like now it's a lot worse
Well, and
than in years past.
as we're taking tracks away, you know, back in the old days, that's the reason they were building urban tracks, was to be able to get people off the streets and take them to the tracks. Now we're taking those tracks away. You know, even Cletus McFarland, he's seeing a housing development developed right next to his racetrack.
Yeah.
So we're saying take it off the streets and put it on the racetrack. Well, then we're taking your racetracks
And then they
away.
complain about, and then the people in the development complain about street racing.
Right, and then it'll end up shutting the racetrack down because you want...
Don't buy a house near
Next to
a
racetrack?
racetrack if you don't want to listen to racing.
Yeah.
You know? It seems like common sense to me.
So if you were getting into racing, you have a youngster that's wanting to get into it. Part of, again, how I started the first video was discussing the closure of a lot of our go-kart track type stuff. The Mad River Mountain is now closed. It's gone. Grand Prix racing that was off of on the east side of Columbus,
70.
it's closed. The go-kart track down in Circleville that used to be there, it's closed.
Yeah.
You know, you see a lot of that stuff going away, so it's harder and harder for kids to get involved. So if it's somebody that's younger, that's in the 7, 8, 9 years old, like when you kind of first started with the dragster side of things, is there a real good option for that kind of thing? Is it video games, or is it?
Honestly, as far as junior dragsters go, they're pretty damn expensive.
Yeah.
Honestly, if your parents aren't fairly well off, or willing to work to death to afford one,
Right.
like it's going to be
Just
tough
because it's
for
a
you to
little
get
car
into
doesn't
it.
mean it's a little expensive.
No, man, they're really expensive. Like, you can easily have 20 grand in one of them things. You could have 5 in one that's just a starter. It's tough for sure.
So how does a youngster get involved in racing?
Honestly, the racing sims are probably a good start.
Yeah.
The racing simulators now are pretty wild. They're pretty
But you can
awesome.
have a lot of money involved.
You can have a lot of money in those too. I mean, I think the bottom line is everything's too damn expensive.
Yeah, it's not a poor man's sport. It
No,
never
it's
really
not.
has been, and it definitely
And
isn't
I ain't
now.
gonna bullshit you.
Yeah.
It's not for. You got to have some money to get started.
Yeah, and a lot of drive.
And
You've
a lot
got
of
to be
people-
hungry.
A lot of people in the small tire world, and then some of the fastest stuff, they're drug dealers. Let's be honest.
Yeah, for sure.
Or they have really, really big businesses
Yeah,
or something.
they have
like
some
that.
sort of income that they can just pour into
Yeah.
going racing.
It's wild, man.
Yeah,
It's wild. It's tough to get into, and the cost of everything, it doesn't seem to be coming down.
yeah. And while the speeds are also getting faster and faster, because you guys basically almost never run quarter miles anymore.
Yeah.
Like when I was coming up, quarter mile racing was the eighth mile was not a thing.
Yeah.
It was always quarter miles, and then the cars have gotten faster and faster and faster to the point where eighth mile is kind of your standard thing anymore.
Right.
Almost none of the no prep cars even run quarters anymore, do you?
Not really, And I guess if you wanted to get into bracket racing, that's probably the cheapest way. If you were into that, if you're not into that, then grudge.
Right. We have a guy actually that's kind of was motivated by you. He's watched all your stuff forever, and we ended up doing a bunch of work for him on a blue S10 that he did, and he's literally building it to go out bracket racing to have that kind of thing. So, like you were his inspiration to do that. But even that, and he did most of the work. We just did a few of the fine tuning bits. You still got a lot of money in that. And then, like you said, I mean, you're going to be going up against people that they have their car dialed in, they have their foot dialed in, they've got
been
their
racing for years and years and years.
They know how to cut
Every
a 00
weekend.
something tree every single time they're out there. So you're going to be going out, and you got to realize that you're going to lose for a long, long time, and you're spending money to be out there to do it. So
I think there needs to be something, for people to get into that's more affordable.
do you see any kind of a differentiation in the classes at some point in time? Do you keep it like tire specific, so you have like a hard tire class versus a small tire class?
Yeah, I think small tires should stay the way it is. Small tire should always, like small tire no prep. I think it should always just be tire size, steel roof and quarters. Because what you're gonna see is like a lot of people will want tube chassis cars to be banned, but how do you differentiate a tube chassis car from a normal chassis? Well, it's just a few feet of frame rail.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to stop anything. Unless you have to get super specific with the rules, and then
Right.
you have to tech the cars extremely specifically, and then it just turns into class racing.
Right.
And then there's less cars. And honestly, a lot of these cars winning these events, like National Trails a few weeks ago, how many chassis cars did you see in the final 8 cars? It was uncaged, back into the track, and I think there might have been one chassis car left at like 16 cars.
Everything else was real cars?
Yeah, everything else was either Fox bodies or S10s or mainly Fox bodies. But, I don't think it's going to change too much by limiting the classes as far as small tire goes. But I think there is a good opportunity to get some of the small tire cars that can make a cruise in a street class. I think there definitely needs to be more street classes for sure.
When I was racing more, when I was 20 years ago, that was a big thing. It's like you had E85 was not a thing, and street cars were street cars. They were generally, you could drive it to and from the track. You could get pump gas. Like that's what it ran on.
E85 changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, because you used to have $10 a gallon buckets of fuel, and now you can have $2 a gallon buckets of race gas, and it's a whole lot less of an issue. So it's changed a lot of things, and I think one of the biggest problems that you see with a lot of things, or at least on the side that we hear about, is people that want to get involved in it, but they're worried. Same thing honestly, and even street racing is, if I don't have a 1,000 horsepower car, why do I even show up? I'm just going to get my teeth kicked in, because everybody else there is, their LS turbo junkyard. And
even the hard tire classes, you got to have 1,000 horsepower now to keep up with some of the fastest.
Yeah. But like you said, I mean, and there's a lot of other classes, especially in like the road racing world, or like SCCA type stuff, where they've almost ruined their types of racing because they put too many classes in. So like they make it okay, well this class is going to be the 2810.5 S10, stock frame rails class. Okay, well this is going to be the Mustang that has to have a full interior in a 5-speed class.
Yes.
Then you end up with 50 classes and 2 cars in each one, and it's not fun. It's not entertaining for people. Part of what you guys do that's so cool is like every weekend you show up, there's going to be all sorts of different cars that are going to be involved, and you're competing against all of them.
But what surprises me is there must be a lot of people with money, because there's a lot of fucking fast cars at these events.
Oh yeah.
Like you go anywhere where there's a $10,000 or $20,000 payout, and you're going to have 70 to 100 cars, and the caliber of these cars is just insane, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fast cars out there right now,
and continuing. You're getting more people that are following that golden ring.
Yeah, I don't know where they're all coming from. Radio racing or dirt track guys coming over. I don't know.
They've all been sitting at home watching YouTube and working in the garage, getting ready to come out and take your head off.
There are a few guys locally that I know of that have stepped up their programs in the last year or so, and it's good to see that for sure. It's good to see people stepping up and giving it a shot. There's a lot of people with drive out there.
So you still see a lot of new people coming in, new blood coming in.
I wouldn't say a lot of young people.
Yeah,
but there's a lot
it's an
of
expensive thing.
There is a lot of. It seems like there's a lot of older people that either used to race or they did a different type of racing that are coming over to no prep,
converting like bracket cars over to this.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of like young people getting into it though. Other than there is a young girl, Addie, that follows my dad's channel.
Yeah.
She's looking to get into racing.
Yeah.
You see here and there, you see people getting into it and stuff like that, but it's definitely tough to get into.
Yeah.
With the price of everything these days.
That's racing.
Yeah, it's just racing, I think.
Yeah. All right, well, let's transition this over to talking about road racing. It's another way to spend a whole bunch of money on car stuff and break very expensive parts on a pretty regular basis. That's a totally different side of this, and I've got Norm from Team Blitz. He's going to talk to us about that side of things. So we'll be right back with you. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
This is what used to be the Circleville go-kart track. as you can tell, it doesn't exist anymore. It's a truck place. We're storing truck stuff. For decades, this was a place that different car clubs would come to, mini bike races would happen, lots of different go-kart type of stuff, shifter karts, normal karts, you name it, they raced it here. Our entrance was right over there, and it went right over there. Great place to come play, hone your automotive skills, develop a driving sense, lots of turns. Could be adapted to whatever it is you wanted to do it, but it's gone. Never to return. Well, welcome to Grand Prix karting. At least, what used to be Grand Prix karting. It's now a storage location. My thermos from here. When it used to be a go-kart track. This is actually where I started our conversation a couple of years ago, and it was a great location. They had leagues here, real super fun technical track. There's plenty of straights, plenty of curves, very competitive, very, very fun time, and they were pretty reasonably busy. Clearly not busy enough to stay in business, but you know, that's one more. It's gone, never to return. Norm!
Yes, sir.
Good to see you again, sir.
You too.
How you been?
Real good, man.
So you were supposed to bring a Mustang for us to shoot with.
Yeah, I had a little problem at Mid-Ohio. This is what $10,000 worth of winning will get you. It'll get you a little zinc first place trophy and a little flag. But so we won race 1, but race 2, the motor went boom. So that's racing.
But at least you won.
I won the first race. The second race, the oil pump decided to disintegrate, and a 4-cam Coyote motor doesn't run too well with no oil.
Yeah.
So go boom, and new motor going in it probably in about a week.
Wow.
So we'll get back into the action. It's just one of those things. It's inevitable when you race enough.
Yeah, like you said. That's racing.
It's part of the sport, unfortunately.
So Norm, we met oddly through my Capri purchase.
Right.
You are our Capri parts supplier. You also do a lot in the world of vintage racing and road racing.
Right. Yeah. I got into vintage racing basically because the stuff that I race now is old. Didn't start out that way, but yeah, we do vintage racing. I have an Anglia, a Mustang, a Capri that we vintage race. And then for club racing, I'm in T1 with a Boss 302.
Okay.
So
you're all over the spectrum.
We
Anglia,
do that.
Yeah. Mustang.
And we do some hill climb events. There's one at Bell Fountain, Ohio. There's other hill climbs around the country, and we may do some more of that. That's kind of fun. It's not as it doesn't require the stamina that road racing does, so it's a little bit more chill, you know.
Well, so one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you is you can give us really first-hand knowledge. The rest of us can just bench race and armchair quarterback as far as the state of racing, what's going on in road racing, and what really what it is now, what it can be, how you get involved in it.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you because you're actually in it. You mean you've even won stuff. So as far as what you see, what you've experienced, what is the current state of your kind of racing right now?
It's really in flux, Austin. The thing is, I had a very telling conversation this past weekend with some guys that were paddock next to our trailer. And they do dirt track racing, and they said, hey, we're here doing road racing this weekend. The entry fee was $475, which is, believe it or not, folks, pretty inexpensive as road racing entry fees go. They can go as high as almost $1,000
just for the permission to be there.
For an amateur race, right? For like an SCCA Trans Am, entry fee is $3,200. So yeah, they were telling me in dirt track racing where they race, the entry fee is $30, $30, and it pays actual money as opposed to this amateur racing. We get a little medal and maybe a flag. They get paid all the way down to 15th place. And he was telling me 15th place will get you $50 from the track owners.
So paid in 30, got 50.
Yeah.
You paid for your more, some of your.
Yeah, and first place might pay like $800. And so there was something that's got to change. We had a very small, for what we should have, we had a very small turnout. SCCA has probably around 55 or so classes. We only had 128 cars at this event at Mid-Ohio. So maybe 1 or 2 cars for most of the classes.
And some of those classes are heavy.
Yeah. Right.
So like a Miata class is going to have
That's right.
15 cars.
So there were a bunch of classes, like my own class, where I was the only guy. I had to find somebody else to race with. So I ended up racing against some Corvettes and some Porsches and other cars that were around my speed, and we just got together and we had our own little race.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean anything except to us.
Sure.
But
if you're at least you're running with somebody else.
Yeah.
You're not just out there turning laps. Right?
But that, for all of us, is a little disappointing because we don't go to the track. We're racers.
Yeah.
Right? Racers have this mentality. We know when something means something and we know when it doesn't.
Sure.
And when you are in a class by yourself, literally, right, it's not satisfying. There is no sense of accomplishment or anything to just go out and turn laps. That's why the group of us that found ourselves at that competitive speed, we formed our own little impromptu group and just had a race within our own little capabilities.
But you guys were all in separate classes.
We were in separate classes, and we just happened to find ourselves turning around the same lap times. And so that was our race.
Gotcha.
And it was fun, but you know.
That's probably more gentlemanly racing.
That's right.
Than like Norm's driving at 1010s, tires are screaming around every corner.
Well, we were all driving at 1010s.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, we're on each other and we're doing all the same stuff we would have done in any other kind of race. But it's not satisfying when you're in a race that has 2 or 3 other cars. You know, when I got started in SCCA, to give you some perspective, in my group alone, ITB, we would have 50 cars in just our class. 50
Wow.
cars. And
how many classes were there at that point?
well, in IT there were 4 classes, and SCCA back then probably had about 30 classes total.
Okay.
So it's almost doubled as they try to satisfy these various niches of, you know, well, this car has a turbo, so we got to create a class for that kind of car. And this is the non-turbo class, and this is the class for whatever. And it's just kind of grown exponentially to the point that I don't think the fans, I'm not even sure the racers themselves understand the differences between some of these classes. So SCCA, in my opinion, needs to really consolidate the classes to get the car count up within the classes so that there are meaningful races.
Sure.
You know, and I'm just not seeing the same kind of turnout. The events themselves are not as many laps. Again, back in the 80s, a given race would be 45 minutes, maybe 18 to 20 laps. Now they're 10 to 12 lap races, 20 minutes,
Sure.
whichever comes first. And, you know, something's got to give.
As far as barrier to entry for a new racer to come in,
Yeah.
is it a cost thing?
Well, as we just discussed, right? The circle track, the dirt guide, $30.
Right.
You know, you got a lot of leftover money to buy your car and maintain your car, right?
Right.
If you only have to pay $30 to enter the race.
And it's probably going to be a wash, your entry fee versus what you walk with.
That's right.
Versus a track day. I mean, and the thing is too with a track
Yes,
day, you got a lot of
racing.
consumables.
Yeah, we're throwing huge amounts of money into a black hole.
Yeah.
I always say it's like boating, right? You can't make money, you know, with a yacht,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's just a way of entertaining yourself, and you're throwing money into a black hole and it disappears. And unfortunately, road racing's like that. I mean, I'll go to like Lime Rock and run their Vintage Festival, and they get a huge gallery. They get a big turnout. So they're selling a lot of tickets. There's a lot of vendors. They're getting money from vendors that display at the vintage events, but yet they're charging us $700-800 to enter. And I keep thinking, wait a minute, something's wrong with this.
You're the entertainment and you're playing.
We're the entertainment, so wait a minute. Okay, you invite Ted Nugent to put on a rock concert, or Stevie Nicks, or Pink Floyd. You bring in an act, they put on the show, you pay the act. It's not how it's working, and it works differently in other racing. Indy, NASCAR, the dirt track guys, they're all getting paid.
There's a purse.
There's a purse, and we're paying money, and some of these cars are $1 million cars.
Right.
I was on track at Lime Rock with cars that came out of a museum in Florida, and they were in a museum the day before. Now they're in Connecticut. One of them was a Grand Bahama Corvette, probably a $6 million car. And I'm out there in my Capri. Now
door to door?
Yeah, the Capri's worth some money, but not $6 million. And you just think, well, those people paid money to enter that Corvette, but yet they're the entertainment.
Yeah.
So, yes, so for people getting started in SCCA, if they want to go road racing, probably the stepping stone would be autocross first, which is parking lot gymkhana, where you're
chasing cones.
You're weaving out of between cones, one car at a time. You're not door handle to door handle, and it's $15, $25, right? And you get maybe 4 to maybe 6 or 7 runs. And it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
And there's going to be a lot of people in your class. And if you win at the end of the day, hey, you really did something. And then up from that would be like track nights, SCCA, HPD. SCCA puts on these track night events at certain tracks where you can go out in your street car, and you can't race, but you can go pretty fast. No passing in the corners or anything dangerous, because you're not going to have roll cages and all that stuff. So that would be step 2. And then real HPDEs, where you're in a prepped car with a roll cage or at least a roll bar. And then they have, new at SCCA, they have time trials, which is a competitive event. They also have hill climbs. And again, you are basically at that point not wheel-to-wheel racing, but racing against the clock.
Right.
Okay?
I can turn a faster lap than Norm.
That's right.
Not necessarily us doing it at the same time.
That's right.
I'm going to go out and run a flying qualifier faster than you.
That's right. And whoever has the lowest ET wins flat out. And there's various categories. And I think the cost to do that at Mid-Ohio this past Friday, so 4 days ago, was $225. And it was an all-day event. And you got about an hour and a half of track time, from what I understand. I didn't do it. I was racing the next 2 days in the divisional race, the road race, which was wheel-to-wheel. So that would be an excellent way to kind of dip into it. And then there's other sanctioning bodies like NASA. I think you mentioned
Grid Life.
Grid Life. There's a few other of these the series that you can get on track and see if you like it. It's not for everybody.
There's also a pretty significant cost difference between autocross in a parking lot and driving a car reasonably competitively in road racing.
Yes.
Not just in fuel.
And in fact, there's an advantage in autocross to not having a prepared car.
Right.
Because my road race cars have 300-400 pounds worth of roll cage welded in.
Yep.
Right? Well, that's a disadvantage.
Right.
I mean, that's like throwing 2 of your buddies in the car, right? And hauling them around the autocross course. So If you turn out at an autocross, here in Columbus, they do it at Fortress Obetz.
Yep.
And if you turn up there, you got to register ahead of time, but you have a few days online to register. And if you show up in a street car without a roll cage, big advantage.
Sure.
You're not going to roll your car.
Right.
I mean, this is first and second gear racing.
Right.
Okay. You're not going to roll your car. It's in a parking lot. First and second gear.
You're not going to hit anybody.
You're not going to hit anybody. They do not do these courses where there's light poles or,
Right.
anything that, if you're in any kind of control of yourself, you're not going to hit anything. For small beer money, you can go out there in something like a Ford Fiesta or a Ford Focus, or a Honda Civic and just have a ball. Mm-hmm. And just, you don't have to be in some big hairy Corvette. In fact, you'll have more fun in a small horsepower car.
I agree.
More tossable.
Right. So in the situation with road racing, in drag racing and a lot of other types of racing, we've seen a lot of track closures. We've seen a lot of the things that we've taken for granted, being able to go out and do these kinds of things. Is that translating over? Is that bleeding over into the road racing world? Are we seeing track closures on that side of things, or is it?
It's a mixed bag. So one of the newest tracks was built in the Ozarks in Missouri, and
that was just like last year or 2 years.
Yeah, it just recently opened up, and the SSCA has had one or two events there. I think other sanctioning bodies are sniffing at it, IMSA, whatever. The thing is, it takes like a patron. So this guy, if I understand the story right, the guy owns an earth moving company, a paving company, a construction company, and he has all this ground, shaping equipment.
Gotcha.
And he basically created this track for him and his
I want a
family.
racetrack.
Yeah. And
Gotcha.
had the property and just did it. And then he's like, oh, well, maybe some other people would like to come here and have
Sure.
some fun. So it's a little unusual in that respect. It wasn't like planned as a municipal upgrade to attract tourists. And we find that a lot of the road racing circuits like Watkins Glen, Sebring, Mid-Ohio, a lot of the tracks, VIR, a lot of the tracks are in really rural, kind of isolated areas from population.
Sure.
And then as population encroaches, that's when you find these tracks having to close down. A classic case would be like Riverside, California. So that was out in the desert.
Right.
That was out, kind of where nobody wanted to live. And then all of a sudden a housing development, a shopping center, and all of this gets planned, and the value of that real estate offset the value of it as a racetrack and was sold to developers.
Yep.
What has kept a place like Laguna Seca in business is that property is owned by the county.
Right.
So the county of Monterey, I believe it is, Monterey County owns that property, and they lease out the rights to operate it. And that might be a model for other tracks around the country as they go into receivership, or when hopefully more enlightened politicians, if because really what started legal, if you will, off the street racing in purpose-built drag strips was kids dying doing street racing. There were horrible accidents, and what the city of Los Angeles did, and the AAA and the sheriffs and various law enforcement did out there in California and Los Angeles was operate the NHRA's first strip, Lions drag strip, and the whole idea was get people off the street, give them a place to race where there's ambulances, where there's fire extinguishers, and there's rules.
And it's a controlled environment.
It's a controlled environment, and guess what? It's lit up at night, and you have permission to run there.
Right.
You're not sneaking around, and you're not going to find yourself upside down in a car on fire with nobody to help you.
Right.
So,
but as you said,
that needs to come back. We need places for young people to race.
Yeah.
Because hey, boys and girls like to go fast.
Yep.
I don't care if they're going to race EVs.
Yep.
You know, they want to go fast. They're seeing all,
And they want to be competitive.
and they want to be competitive. They see all this on YouTube, or they watch programs like Street Outlaws or what have you, and they see people having fun in cars, and then they go try that on the back roads, on the twisties in Ohio.
Yeah.
Not good.
Doing Tail of the Dragon or Triple Nickel in their Mustang,
right.
and they throw it off into a ditch and
Going through the what is it, the Daniel Boone Forest down there in Appalachia, Ohio. Yeah, not good, man.
Yeah.
Not good. Not on those switchbacks. I know it's a lot of fun and all that stuff, but if you get hurt, you're going to be in the woods and people will find you 2 weeks later.
Right. I made that comment in one of the road trip video when we did the Tail of the Dragon in February.
Yeah.
Like if you're running this by yourself.
Yeah.
And you go off the side of this mountain, they may or may not ever find you.
No.
Until it gets to be busy season.
Yeah, like
then somebody else goes off.
Like Wayne National Forest down in southern Ohio, definitely same kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's roads going to Old Man's Cave down there.
Great roads to drive.
roads. And the automotive magazines, they do their test car runs down there. But, you know, nobody's going to do 150 miles an hour and probably survive. You're gonna go in the woods, and it'll be like a pro rally, except nobody's there to help you.
Right.
So the NHRA, the way it got started with Wally Parks, I worked at an NHRA track as a kid. I got to meet Wally, and Wally was bigger than life. I mean, he was truly a really tall dude, and his entire emphasis, the entire point of NHRA, believe it or not, the start of it was to get people off the street and onto tracks where the safety could be ensured.
Sure.
And as we lose racetracks, we're putting our kids and our friends inevitably out there on the street because they're gonna race.
Yeah.
They're gonna race, man. And it's, I don't know, we gotta figure something out. I think the fees to enter the SSCA races and these vintage races, they're getting so extreme now that I'm afraid it's going to become, again, back to being like a sport for rich people.
Right.
And
which, historically speaking, racing is not an inexpensive sport.
it's not an
But you've
inexpensive
got inexpensive ways to get into
it. And, you know, my situation is my kids are grown up. Hey, it's just me. I can go race.
Yeah.
I'm not taking money. Like I'm not taking food off the table from my family.
Sure.
But for younger guys that have kids and they want to go racing, man, I want them to be able to race at a facility that's safe.
Yeah.
As safe as, I mean, racing's dangerous, but as safe as it can be. I mean, at Mid-Ohio, we have a doctor on hand, we have ambulances, they have a helicopter pad, all the corner workers have fire extinguishing equipment, and there's wreckers and rollbacks. All of this stuff comes with the track.
Right.
That's the way it should be.
So, for the future of road racing and vintage racing, with lump vintage racing into that also, where do you see the next evolution of that going? What is it? Where is it? Is it going to slowly die? Is it going to become a rich guy's toy kind of situation where, you know, younger folk just can't afford to get into it?
Yeah.
Is it a situation where the tracks are going to close down because urban sprawl is now eating up all of these, you know, tracks that used to be in the middle of nowhere that they're now in suburban areas?
Yeah.
Where do you see that in the next 10 years?
So I'm kind of a market forces guy, right? I kind of think that if left to the market, these problems will probably resolve themselves, but not to everybody's benefit. I like the model of government encouraging safe motoring behavior, and part of what they did in California with that drag strip, right?
Municipal drag.
Municipal, right?
I'm working here.
So part of that is the idea, like the county of Monterey that operates Laguna Seca, like they used to have Lions Drag Strip in LA that's now closed. But the idea that you would have government acknowledging that, hey, you know, kids gone wild, right?
Yeah.
If the government needs to subsidize or in some way underwrite some of the expenses, or have some kind of a program, maybe tied to a technical college, maybe tied to your vocational high schools. I don't know, but there's got to be some creative ways to get some kind of underwriting for racing. And, you know, it's not unheard of. The city of Columbus, when we had the Columbus 500 and, you know, the street races in Long Beach, California, the street races they have in Miami.
They're even doing Indy now down in Detroit.
They did NASCAR through the streets of Chicago this year. So other municipalities, other state governments are spending money. They are subsidizing racing in some way, shape, or form. And if our local drag strip like National Trails, if they need a little help in order to get those kids to get off the street and go to National Trails, hey, you know, I can see some kind of subsidization or some kind of program, you know, and I would like to see that happen, because otherwise I do think it's going to go one of two ways. You're not going to see people go to the track because of the expense. And what you're also going to see is those very few events that do exist are going to be super wealthy people,
right?
You know, or they're going to be people that put on a show that frankly nobody wants to go to. So for example, like in vintage racing, they recently homologated into vintage racing Miatas, because Miatas are now over 25 years old.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's
so a lot of people are like, oh, a Miata's not, like I came out here to see a Ford GT40,
right?
Like the, you know, Ford versus Ferrari movie,
right.
Or I came out here to see a Shelby Mustang, or a, you know, a Porsche 935 Turbo. You know, I came out here to see older stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, guys with these, like that museum I mentioned that came out with a $6 million the Bahama Corvette, fewer and fewer of those real cars are coming out now.
Sure.
Right? Because they just don't want to risk them. And
it's also massively expensive to get involved in that kind of racing.
It's massively expensive. I mean, that museum's in Florida. They trucked 4 or 5 cars all the way up to Connecticut, paid all that money, hired professional drivers to drive the cars.
Wow.
Yeah, so how many regular six-pack Joes like me and like you, us guys, how are we gonna afford that?
Yeah.
It's just less and less possible unless, you know, they help us out on the entry fee, or somehow market forces have to address that situation. Some entrepreneur has to decide, like, you know, Kid Rock decide his concert, I'm going to charge $15 a ticket, and I'm just going to choose not to make money at this concert.
Yeah.
So some people during COVID and during the you know, economic hard times, some of the entertainers did things like that. If we have people doing things like that in racing, market forces will correct this downtrend. But otherwise, we have big challenges. We're in flux. We're definitely, I think we're reaching critical mass where it's just so expensive. I'm really concerned that people are going to take it back to the streets, and it's going to get real messy.
Well, unfortunately, as you close more tracks, as you make it less accessible, as they're less open late, they're not open on this day or that day or whatever the case may be.
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
People are going to compete. People want to go fast, like you said.
That's right.
They're going to do it one way or another.
Right.
Whether or not they're going to do it legally or they're going to do it in a controlled environment.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult. So even tracks that are allowed to persist, like Waterford Hills in Michigan, has had very tight zoning restrictions placed on it. They can only have open pipe racing on 4 weekends a year. The rest of the time, they have to meet, I believe it's an 85 decibel restriction, and it's measured by the township. They actually have They actually have people out there recording this data that then goes to the government to verify nobody made more than 85 decibels, or else there's a fine and legal ramifications for that. So yeah, and you mentioned National Trails when we were talking off camera has a a curfew.
Yeah.
And all of this is just as you tighten the screws, there's less and less opportunity for, I keep talking about young people, but really it's people of all ages. They cannot have their thing.
Are you optimistic for the future? Pessimistic?
Hey, I'm a wait and see guy on this one.
Okay.
Really, I can see some good things happening, right? I do see, again, we're market forces, groups like NASA, groups like Grid Life, groups like SCCA that are doing some outreach with these track nights and with these events where you can bring a street car out. And good old bracket racing, I don't know when NHRA or when National Trails here locally, but bracket racing at places like Pacemakers up in Mount Vernon or National Trail, on, what do they do that, like on weeknights, like Wednesdays?
They'll do like test and tunes on like
Test
Wednesdays
and tunes.
and Fridays.
And it's very inexpensive, like $15 or something. And you can go out there and just have a good old time, and there just we need our zoning officials and our public officials to understand these facilities are gems.
Yeah.
They need to be cared for. They are assets to the community. You shut them down, you're going to have kids dying.
Yeah.
Literally. Now, I don't want to be over dramatic, but again, that's why these tracks were created in the first place, was to get that action off the street.
Yep.
It's going to go right back to the street.
Yeah.
So we got to take care of it.
Well, let's hope.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate you talking.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so with that said, we have another conversation to have with Colton, who's actually a Grid Life racer. He raced in GLTC the last couple of years. He's got a 427 swapped LS powered M3, and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation on what the current state of that is with Colton. So get back in the car. We'll see you guys in a minute.
Well, welcome to Malibu Grand Prix karting, or at least what's left of it. This was kind of the premier, truly competitive, we're talking not bumping and running kind of go-kart stuff. We're talking like driver training, really fast open wheel karts. This was a fantastic facility. Unfortunately, it closed in I think the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. It became an international school for a little while. I have no idea what it is now. It's a abandoned office building. But the whole track is still here. You can see all of the turns, the straights, they're all still here. Nobody bothered to rip up all the concrete that was poured, all the light poles for everything. This was a fantastic facility, and it was definitely more of your advanced go-karting. This was not for just kids getting out in karts, but they also had an arcade on the inside there as well. So if you're old enough to remember when we used to put coins in machines to be able to play video games, that was a big portion of what they did here. I have no idea what it is now, but it's certainly not a kart track anymore. Another one gone. So this is not Colton. This is Rob Fields of Fields Auto Works. Rob, thanks for giving me some time.
Absolutely.
So the neat thing here is you are going to be able to give us not necessarily the driver's side of things. You can also give us all of the background side of things in the racing side of things. So these guys do Grid Life on a pretty regular basis. You were part of what you recommend is the traveling circus, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So we build cars, transport cars, support them at the racetrack, coach the drivers. Sometimes we rent cars out, but this is one of our old rental cars. And basically provide the full arrive and drive opportunity for drivers across the country at Grid Life events, but also at some local events like NASA, SSCA, things like that.
In this side of things, is it predominantly people that are trying to do like the one-man show kind of thing? Is this something you can still do as a one-man show?
It is. Grid Life is kind of at the front end of the field in Grid Life. It's really approaching the edge of what you can do as a one-person or one or two-person type of team.
Okay.
And for a lot of our customers, it makes more sense, given their day jobs, their daily commitments, all that kind of stuff. It makes more sense for them to pass that responsibility on and pay somebody to do it rather than have to do it themselves. But certainly, even at the very front of the field, there are still people who are doing it on their own. A lot of them rely heavily on sponsors or other resource support like that. But in terms of the physical work, a lot of them are 1 or 2 person kind of efforts.
Gotcha.
But Grid Life's really kind of at the very edge of where you can still do that. Really, anything more serious than that, you're either getting into club level endurance racing, which necessitates more people, or if you're going further in sprint racing, you're going to get into professional ranks where you really do need a team behind you.
So for those who are not familiar, Grid Life is kind of the next generation, I guess, or the new generation of door-to-door on-track road racing. Whether it's time attack stuff or it's door-to-door true competition racing.
Right.
And it's an interesting series because you also are not running like a spec series. It's not like Spec Miata or Spec Corvette.
It's the furthest thing from it. So this Acura is a perfect example of a car that at one time was very competitive in the field. It's a big, heavy car, front-wheel drive, 6-speed manual. In comparison, there are cars that are very lightweight, rear-wheel drive, mix of transmissions, mix of drivetrains. Really, it's anything from an MX-5 to there's even a Honda Odyssey minivan that runs some of the events. So
wow,
it's about the furthest thing from a spec series you can get. There's a very basic rules formula that outlines your power to weight, what you can and can't do to the chassis, suspension, aero, things like that.
Gotcha.
And the parity is incredible. For having such an open concept of the rules for the class, GLTC, Grid Life Touring Car, which is the wheel-to-wheel series, they really do have amazing parity. They've got Corvettes and Civic hatchbacks and sedans and BMWs and all of these things all competing right at the very front.
All actually getting some really good quality racing.
Absolutely, and equally good quality screen time. Grid Life is covered through their streaming program almost as well as some professional racing series are. Maybe even better than some racing series in parts of the world.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to focus on a lot with this, and the reason I wanted to talk with you guys is you're in a different world than a lot of the other people. The drag racers and the vintage car guys and the sprint car guys, that's a little bit different world than what you play in. What are you seeing as far as the current status? Like, is it growing? Is it falling apart? Are the tracks closing? Is it, because we've seen a lot of negative things going on in the racing world. Is that kind of coming into your world, or you guys kind of impervious to that?
Well, we certainly feel the effects of a lot of those things. At the end of the day, the base level infrastructure of the industry that supports drag racing or oval racing or any of those types of racing still in some ways support us. We still buy parts from drags and places like that, right? But in our world, there are some organizations that have existed for a long time in road racing that have been losing membership pretty steadily or aren't necessarily growing. But those people don't tend to leave the sport. They tend to find other homes or other areas tend to grow. So Grid Life's a great example of something that has grown massively from a very grassroots level, but it also is limited in the number of events that they hold per year. They only have a single central organization that travels rather than independent regions. So you're really signing up for a major travel commitment. There's only
so it's not like the Ohio Valley region.
No, it's exactly the opposite. Right, it's exactly the opposite. It's really a traveling circus.
Okay.
They get referred to sometimes as kind of dirtbag IMSA, right? So it's a similar concept of they really are traveling the country, providing a series where you're not going to hit the same track over and over again, but you are going to see the same competitors.
Gotcha.
So on the one hand, that's phenomenal because the growth has been outrageous. The combination of the music festival, the party atmosphere, the drifting, all that stuff, those have all added a tremendous amount of value and pulled new people in, a new generation, a new kind of crowd of people. But it's limited in its scope by the nature of it being a single central organization and the amount of travel. It has shed off, though, a lot of new and interesting people who continue to do that. They either do only their local Grid Life event and then do SSCA, NASA, other things like that.
Okay.
Or they do track days or other things like that. But it's very rare for somebody to put a car together, do a Grid Life event, and then park it. Right?
Gotcha.
So it's been a great conduit into the sport for a lot of people. Can't say enough good things about Grid Life. In the meantime, from a track perspective, yeah, there have been some tracks that have closed or have had to modify their operations. Road Atlanta not running Sunday mornings, Lime Rock not running Sundays, things like that come to mind as kind of adaptations that the tracks take on in order to stay open,
Is that because of like housing developments nearby and sound ordinance type stuff?
It usually is, yes. You know, there's a common occurrence of people, you know, moving next to an existing racetrack and then being mad that there's a racetrack. But at the end of the day, it's as vocal a minority as we may want to be. In situations like that, we can be the minority, and so sometimes the communities do get to impose their will on the track. Thankfully, like I said, most of the time it means a modification of operations rather than shutting down. But it does happen. The other thing that happens, you know, there's a lot of potential growth where there are people trying to build tracks. There are 5 or 6 that we're aware of on the eastern half of the United States that are in planning and development phases. One even very locally to us here that looks like it's got really strong prospects. So, you know, there's clearly market growth. There's clearly a demand for what we're doing. But building a racetrack is a huge endeavor.
Oh, yeah.
So there have been a couple of stalled efforts that you know didn't make it all the way. Seems like once a track gets open and is operating, they tend to stick around for a long time.
So in your side of things, you're seeing a good horizon. There is a positive thing coming. It's not necessarily that you're on the waning edge of poo-poo motorsports is falling away.
Yeah, no, we really, frankly, have a very positive outlook. I think there are a couple of really important things to recognize in it. One, I think as slow as some parts of the community and some parts of the industry and the tracks and stuff have been to accept it, I don't think there's any question that some version of hybrids, EVs, things like that are coming in. That's part of it. Another part of it that I think can't be ignored is the fact that wheel-to-wheel racing isn't the main conduit onto a racetrack anymore. You know, for decades, organizations like SSCA, NASA, stuff like that, they really depended on people to go get a race car, go through comp school, start racing. And now I think for every one licensed wheel-to-wheel racer, there's something like 20 people that do track days. So that has become really the conduit into the sport. And if you pay attention not so much to, you know, how many wheel-to-wheel, you know, formula cars in this one class or how many whatever, but rather take the industry as a whole, I think you do see growth overall in terms of the performance industry and road course participation if you include HPDE or track days.
Yeah. So, say somebody's young and getting involved in automotive stuff. We've talked a little bit about and shown a little bit about the closings on things that used to be the way you get young people into autosports, you know, with go-kart racing and that kind of thing. What do you see as the primary way to get a younger person that's not necessarily even maybe a teenager yet involved in the autosports world if you have something else?
Sure. So if you're talking teenage or if you're talking pre-driver's license,
yes,
your options are a little more limited, right? So karting is still one of the premier ways of getting into the sport, and like the value per dollar is very high there. But there are a lot of other options. I know certain organizations will let you do like track days and autocross, things like that, if you're too young to have your driver's license.
And then once you get your driver's license.
But then, yeah, so that's the point where it becomes really open, right? So if you own a road legal car and have a driver's license, you can go to the racetrack today. So track days, HPDE, those, you know, or racing schools, those are all kind of gateway program. You know, they all have gateway programs for people who are novice drivers. And for the most part, as long as your car has isn't a big SUV or truck and has a roof, it's not a convertible, you can put some racing brake pads and some racing brake fluid in the car and go drive it on track that day. It doesn't matter if it's an automatic, doesn't matter if it's front wheel drive, doesn't matter if it's a big family sedan. Now those things are going to hinder the performance of the vehicle, but you're going to be way behind the vehicle still at that point.
Sure.
So it's worth doing.
Start learning to better the driver versus
Absolutely,
better the car
absolutely.
first.
And I mean, even guys who've been building a car for 10 years sometimes need to be reminded that, you know, if you're not out there getting seat time and interacting with the other people who do this all the time, you're going to miss out on A, the purpose for building the car in the first place, and B, all the new and interesting stuff that's going on. You know, a lot of times the technology or the parts performance, those kind of things pass people by while they're building the car.
Sure.
And it's, you know, certainly I'm in no position to disparage the building of whole race cars, because that is our business, but at the same time, I would strongly suggest, especially to someone who's never been on a racetrack, you know, take that stock Civic or Toyota Camry or whatever dad's got, mom's got in the garage, put some pads and fluid in it and go. And you know, you get an instructor, you get classroom sessions. It's an amazing thing. The other thing I neglected to mention that I should have mentioned, even for people without driver's license, is sim racing or video game opportunities. So there are a lot of people, I think that's actually a big part of how the track day community grew as much as it did, is people, they either did simulator stuff or they were introduced to Gran Turismo, Forza, whatever, and then somebody came along like, hey, look, you can go do that, like today. You can go do that right now. And so if in lieu of an opportunity to actually drive, certainly, you know, simulation and gaming are very separate things, but simulation is obviously the preferred course, but even just spending time on a game system will get people involved.
You start learning braking points and acceleration spots and bracing lines. And
just the concept of, hey, I paid the upgrade for the tires and the car goes faster. What do you know? Like, so, but yeah, all of that has some level of value, and depending on how exposed you already are, the amount of value that has to you can change. But
good point.
Once you get to the point, though, that you know, all right, Mom's Civic is kind of wore out and you're ready to start into something. The next thing is, don't immediately go build a race car. I highly suggest, if you want to own a car, buy one that's been built. I think everyone's first true race car should have been put together by somebody else, because it is so much cheaper.
And faster.
So much cheaper, and you get to the track right away. Or the other thing, and this is, you know, this is really my strongest suggestion, spend a year renting, and rent a bunch of different stuff. So get a seat in an open wheel car, either through a driving school or rent like a Spec Racer Ford or a Formula Ford or something like that. Get some time in a GT car, rent like a GLTC car or a NASA ST car, maybe a Spec Miata, maybe even a B-Spec car, and just try a bunch of different stuff and see what you like. You know,
that makes sense.
You may think that you're Mario Andretti in the Spec Miata on the sim, but if you go build or buy a Spec Miata and get out there and all of a sudden you discover that every time someone touches your fender, you fly into a blind rage and can't control yourself.
Sure.
Spec Miata is not going to be for you.
Sure.
So that's the kind of thing that I really highly recommend somebody rent a couple of different things, try a seat in a couple of different things. For some people that is within a year or two of trying the sport, and for some people that's 20 years of trying the sport. But eventually most people do get to a point where from an economic sense and from a time perspective, a real race car makes sense for them. And that's kind of where we step into the picture.
Gotcha. On the economic side of things, racing is always expensive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Regardless of what kind of racing, it's always going to be expensive. More expensive than you plan on being. So this would be an option for somebody that wanted to like just buy a car and go to the track this weekend.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So this has been a rental for us. We're getting ready to move it on from our rental fleet. So, you know, it's a good running GLTC car. It'll come with some spares, including the motor and transmission, all the basic stuff you'd expect as a spares package for a car like this. But this is the kind of thing that, you know, yeah, it's been beat on, it's been modified. It's got its specific quirks. It's got things that you'd have to learn to do on it or with it because of the nature of the car. But on the other hand, I drove this to Mid-Ohio, around Mid-Ohio a bunch of times, and back from Mid-Ohio 4 days ago, just on a whim when somebody told me there was an event I could participate in. So it's the kind of thing that you can get in and go do it right now, and you don't have to worry about, oh, it's going to take me a year and $50,000 and I got to get a cage and I got to get this and this is expired and here it is, go, right? With any race car, you could buy a brand new professionally built Trans Am TA2 car, and it's still going to have a bunch of stuff you're going to have to learn and break in and whatever. So don't let that, I would never want somebody to be discouraged by the idea that there's a learning curve to a used car, because if you build a car or you buy a new one, it's going to be the same.
Sure, makes sense. Well, I'm glad to hear that things are not all doom and gloom. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sports out there and a lot of other things that are out there right now that are really kind of weighing on our hobby, our industry as a whole. Whether it's political stuff, whether it's environmental stuff, whether it's parts availability stuff, whether it's the neighbors that are screaming in the lawn about the sound. There's a lot of things that are out there, so it's good to know that you guys are having like a really good renaissance time. Like things are really looking like they're going in the right direction.
Yeah, no, we're very fortunate to be positioned in that spot where it seems like we got a lot of growth. My personal opinion, I think in some form, it might be bicycle racing in 10 years, but there's going to be racing of some kind. There always will be. And there's always the old adage that the first car race was 2 minutes after the second car was built.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that I think there will always be some form of motorsport. There will always be some demand for some version of what we're doing. We may need to adapt as a business, as an industry, as a hobby, but my expectation is that unless you remove the competitive spirit from the human being, there's always going to be racing.
Fair enough. All right. Appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
We'll see Rob again soon. He's got another little toy that they've got hiding somewhere else. We'll talk about it another time, but not quite yet.
Of all the business and track closures I'm going to show in this video, this is probably the one that hurts the most. Not just to me, but to a whole lot of other people. Anybody who grew up in Central Ohio and did any kind of drag racing, especially if you lived in the Marion area, knows where I am. This used to be Marion Dragway. Your entrance here, and there's the gate for ticketing there, and then your staging lanes are over here. There was a tower right there, and you went down that direction. And it was as close as you could possibly get to street racing, to be honest with you. It was basically no prep, basically at any time. Very simple track, no real frills. Still had split steel guardrails. Track was pretty sketchy, but it was real. It was real honest, and it was pretty much the only source of any kind of racing or entertainment for a lot of people that were out here. Generations of people came out here to race on Friday nights and Saturday nights. They came out here and had hot dogs and beers and watched racing or did racing, and that's what this place was known for. And I drove an hour and a half, depending on what part of Columbus I lived to come out here and actually race. Technically speaking, it is still a drag strip. It's just not open to the public, which is a conversation I'm not going to have, and also why I'm not stepping on this property. But this is another one. It's gone. And none of us will probably ever play here ever again. What the heck is this? This is sim racing. This is Phil. Phil, thanks for letting me come over and check out your rig.
Anytime, Austin.
So, potentially the future of racing, or at least a good way to get into racing, but also not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. You could start out cheap if you really wanted to, but if you really are trying to get an authentic experience,
Yeah.
you're looking at probably a minimum of about $2,000 just to buy a rig with a decent seat,
So this
decent
is
feeling pedals.
a rig.
A rig, yes. Is it a replacement for the real thing? Not in my mind. Not close at all. However, it's a close second, and it is a lot cheaper than several track days a year.
Yeah, so a common theme here across this entire video has been attainability and cost. End goal would be, how do you get involved in racing, and what's a reasonably inexpensive way to get involved and stay involved in racing. And whether it's drag racing and bracket racing and no prep racing, whether it's vintage car racing or HPDE events, track day type stuff, or it's grid life, if it's really any kind of racing, all of them are massively expensive. The nice thing with this is basically once you've paid for the car,
Correct.
you've kind of paid for most of your costs.
Yeah, you're free to do it. And really, the software has gotten so good, it really does make you a better driver.
Yeah.
So any time spent here is not a waste if you're actually going to do track days. But in the meantime, you know, you can run hundreds of hours on this,
Right.
as opposed to 5 or 6 20-minute sessions in a day.
Yeah.
You know, and once you actually, you know, paid track insurance and
Right.
$500 for the session and anything else you needed to do, which usually is, you know, you cook a set of brakes, you cook a set of tires. I mean,
Right.
a track day is going to be $1,000.
Yep.
Plus, you know, if you're doing it right. So you get a lot more out of this than you would. But for me, no, not a replacement.
It's not as immersive. Like, you have a pretty serious setup. I mean, not like ridiculously set up,
Yeah.
but a pretty serious setup. But it's still not the smells and the feelings and the experience.
Yep, and the G's and I will say, behind the wheel of a car is still a lot easier than driving this.
Sure.
It just is, because anybody who's driven, and we've driven a long time for on the same length of time in our lives, you have a feeling behind a vehicle that
Yes.
this just can't replace.
Yes.
And you can get close, so you can spend several thousand more dollars, and you can do an actual base that moves and everything, but that actual feeling of blood flow moving in your body, you can't replace.
And you can also feel like, you know, feel the limit of the traction. You can feel the car changing where
Exactly.
its weight points are. You
Yep.
can feel all that.
And you get a lot of that through the wheel. Now, it will de-weight, you know, when you lose traction, and you get that sort of same feel like you would behind the wheel. But ultimately, I think this is really just a great tool for learning driving lines and braking points.
Yeah.
And it'll just make you better. I mean, get your favorite track. I mean, some of these even have Mid-Ohio, like here, that's local that everybody likes to run, and you can run it over and over and over and over. And I'll tell you, from driving Mid-Ohio, it feels just like you're on the track. You got to make the same moves, and the same landmarks are there.
Yeah.
So
And it is a situation where they've digitized the track. They scan the track, so they have the surface, they have the feedback, the bumps. A lot of the same things you will experience going around Mid-Ohio, you will feel those same things here. You will feel the kickback when you go over a turn, or you go into a negative weighting turn where it kind of unloads the suspension and things get a little wonky. You feel a lot of that stuff.
Right.
And the nice thing is with his setup is you have a direct drive unit that will feed
Right.
back to the steering wheel, and a pedal assembly that gives you some of that tension as well. So it does really give you a really good experience. Is this a good way for younger people to get involved in racing? Especially given the fact that so many are coming from something like a Gran Turismo or all of the other things like on PlayStation.
Or now, I mean, I guess that's an aged, you know, Gran Turismo. Now I got Forza.
Right.
Now would be more of a thing.
But those aren't Sims go though. Those are more.
So I think it kind of did, because if I had to go back to my childhood, I loved racing games.
Yeah.
And that translated into getting me behind the wheel, and then I'm 16 years old behind the wheel, and I'm a maniac behind the wheel because of racing games. So it can play into one another. I don't know if sim driving now will get kiddies into actual cars, because I think that culture has changed a little bit. It's not the same. Everybody's just kind of out on their own and at home and playing video games. They're not really trying to get away, because that was the whole thing. I mean, when you got your license, what's the first thing you wanted to do? Get away from your parents.
That's true.
So you were going to hop in the car.
16
and you were
years
go
old,
as
I want
far
my
away as
license
possible.
right now.
I got it on my birthday, and I took off immediately that day.
So there's something definitely to be said with the cultural change. So like when we came up, not that long ago, when we're not that old, but like going out cruising and stuff, that was a thing.
It was. That was a huge social event on a weekend night. Yeah, absolutely, all night.
So wrenching in the garage, going out cruising. I don't know where you guys live, but where we live, cruising is not a thing anymore. Columbus is not. There's not a cruising scene. Like we have our car shows and after car show lunches and that kind of stuff. But the Friday night, Saturday night cruise thing that was a huge portion of the thing.
You get some pop-ups. I think the problem is, like a lot of things, when you live in a heavy populous area like we do right now, it is a cultural shift. It's gotten dangerous.
Also true.
To be out at a lot of these meets, and they bring unsavory people, and you get a lot of illegal racing and rowdy behavior, and then the police are involved, and most people that probably don't want to end up in handcuffs tend to stay away from that scene. So any sort of normal night scene is kind of gone. The innocence is gone.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a great point, because even like the late night meets where you'd be in a parking lot and we'd just be 300 people hanging out talking about cars. A lot of that's gone away because of, like you're saying, things have changed a little bit as far as culturally speaking, and it's not as safe, it's not as welcoming an experience as it used to be. That's a fair point.
Yep, and I will say we are blessed though in Columbus. I will say for the police we have, and there'll be some that disagree, because I've lived in other states, they are pretty lenient compared to a lot of different areas. So I remember growing up in high school, and the state that I lived in at the time, they had predatory police. Just to give you an example, in my vehicle, I was pulled over 12 times between my junior and senior year of high school. Never got a ticket, was never doing anything illegal. I was just being harassed and bullied for being a kid behind the wheel. So
in a little bit of a race car.
In a little bit of a race car. So yes, here is not so bad. So kids, don't be afraid to go out. Don't break the law, but you should be able to cruise around at 11 o'clock on a Friday night and enjoy your time and be left alone. Yeah.
So would you recommend for somebody that wanted to get their child into racing, would this be something that you would say makes sense?
Yes, but you're going to have to be a car person yourself, and I'm assuming you already are if you're getting your kid into racing, because your child is going to have to see your love and your passion. They're going to have to ride with you. They're going to have to spend time with you. They're going to have to be wrenching with you to feel that whole experience. And I think if you're a genuine car person in real life, then this would be a good thing. It'd be a good outlet. I mean, whether you're playing it with the controller or doing it super fancy style right now, and it's going to make them a better driver too, because you have to concentrate in sim rig racing. It's not like driving Forza. It's not a cartoon.
Yeah, we just put up against the wall.
Yeah, you can't do that. You damage the car. You actually have to brake and you have to hit turns. So,
well, one of the other things that's also really nice about this is it's not just the driving side of it. You have to start learning tire pressures, camber, toe, weights. All of that stuff is all incorporated in one of these. If you're in the higher end racing, like Assetto Corsa, iRacing, all that kind of stuff, it's very technical. It's not just hit start, jump in car, drive car around track. You have to you could change all of those driving dynamics.
Really, those are all things that you can change to your driving style. And so we've only been doing this a few short weeks. We haven't actually gotten into it, but I mean, there are millions of variables that I can go in and change that actually probably make me quite a bit better driver, because they're going to do just like a race team does. They're going to say, what do you like, what do you don't like? And they're going to make the changes.
What's the feedback from your experience?
Exactly. Well, what do we need to do? Doesn't feel like it's sticking real good on this turn. Okay, maybe we need to take a little, out of the right front, maybe add a little, stiffness to the rear. I mean, those are all things that can be done. So I guess if your child ever had dreams of actually just being even involved in a race team, like this would be a huge amount of learning and understanding.
And a lot of legitimate racers do this now. This is not just young whippersnappers playing video games.
Isn't Verstappen one of the top sim racers in the world?
So
I'm pretty sure he is. He spends a lot of time, and it shows on the track.
You can memorize things that when you show up at the track, you're like, oh, I remember this turn. I've never raced it in real life in my life.
There's no learning.
But I remember this turn. I know what happens next. So it does work out as an option. Is it a replacement for racing, going out racing on the weekends? No. Is it a good way to get involved with it, and to maybe, especially for us here in the land of snow and 4 seasons, is it a good option for the fall and the winter?
Yep.
Yeah, you can still turn laps. You can
Keep
still
your
get
interest.
experience.
Yep.
And it
doesn't require a lot of time, and it's a good bit of workout for your brain and your senses and your reflexes, and you can just a half hour a day, just hop in and run a few laps, and it keeps you sharp.
Yeah, versus loading it on a trailer, going to get gas, driving everything down, going to the racetrack. You know.
No.
Yeah, just come down in your basement or go to your office or wherever you have your rig set up and turn a couple laps. Get better at driving. So.
Yep.
Cool. Appreciate it, sir.
Absolutely.
Let's wrap this up, shall we? Well, welcome to Cooper Stadium in beautiful downtown Columbus. See our high rises right over there. Well, it's not really all Cooper Stadium. It's about a third of what Cooper Stadium used to be. This has been closed for about 2 decades now, and it was supposed to become a facility known as Spark. As of 2018, project presumed dead. Spark stood for Sports Pavilion and Automotive Research Center, a multifaceted $45 million development centered on the conversion of the 47-acre ballpark site into a racetrack. 2 decades on, still not here, and it's not gonna happen. We were gonna have ourselves a racetrack here. We were gonna have all kinds of interesting things right here in the heart of the city for us to be able to do automotive fun stuff for. Not gonna happen. It's not gonna get developed. Now it's just a place for people to park their semi-trucks. It is what it is. I don't wanna be a naysayer on a lot of this. I don't wanna be a bad, negative type of person. You guys all know me, I'm a positive kind of person. I'm a perpetual optimist. I always like to see the good, the opportunity in every situation. But we need to be honest about what we're facing and what we're really looking at right now. Bandimere in Colorado, gone. Houston Dragway, gone. Atco Dragway in Jersey, gone. Wild Horse Pass Motorsports Park in Arizona, gone. Memphis Dragway, gone last year right before we got down there for Power Tour. NASCAR viewership declining by nearly half in the last decade, from 5.8 million down to 3.3 million, and down 10% viewership just this year. NHRA membership, however, was up at the Gator Nationals this year, biggest event they've ever had. Formula One season is up 28% year over year in international viewing. There are ups and downs. There are some bright spots to be talked about. As Billy mentioned, as Rob mentioned, there are bright spots to talk about. There are ways for youth and for people to get involved in motorsports that's still an option for people. But we do need to be very honest about the fact that we are very possibly in one of the last generations that's going to see automotive sport as we know it now, which is a pretty terrifying thing, honestly. This has been a big portion of my life, being able to do automotive stuff, whether it was dirt track racing or road riding motorcycles or drag racing or autocross racing or road racing or whatever it is. I've been around it my whole life, and it's pretty upsetting to see that a lot of the opportunities are going away. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case where they're all going away. That's not the case at all. But we just all need to be honest here about what's going on, and I wanted to involve some other people that would, have actual firsthand knowledge of this kind of stuff. So you guys can't say I'm just all armchair quarterback in this and I don't know what I'm talking about. I went out and talked to some experts. So at this point in time, I guess the question is, what are we going to do about it? We know the RPM Act was a thing 2 years ago and it kind of floundered. It's a lot of people in the industry that are interested in it, but I hate to tell you this, guys, but a lot of people in the industry, doesn't matter if you don't have anybody who's in a position of power to make it happen. We don't have any politicians on board. We don't have anybody that's fighting the good fight for the automotive side of things. And as much as we scream and yell and stomp our feet, things are going to get developed. Houses are going to come near racetracks. Political things are going to happen. We need to enjoy what we can, encourage people as much as we possibly can to get involved in whatever kind of sport and activity they possibly can automotively. other than this stupid sideshow stuff, and enjoy it while we can. So, if you know anybody that's interested in this kind of thing or they like this video, send it to them. Forward it, share it, post it, whatever. Let's get as many people in this conversation as we possibly can, because we've got to have these conversations or nobody else is going to have them. Thanks for being here, guys. Thanks to everybody who helped me with this video. All of the video that you helped me film is incredibly important for this. I really wanted to get some other opinions on this and it not just be me talking into a camera. So the sun is starting to set. I'm going to wrap this up. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.